Hello and welcome back to the Measured Golf YouTube channel. In this video, we're going to look at a really interesting topic and we're going to talk about hand depth. What is it? How do we use it? But more importantly, how can we understand this topic better and how can we use this topic to help you play some of the best golf of your life? So hand depth, what is it? Why is it important? And why is it so misleading? Well, everywhere you look across social media, you're going to see somebody talk about either making the club more shallow or making the club steeper. And what you generally hear out there is that shallow is good and steep is bad. But we just need to really understand how both of those things balance out to a well-rounded golf swing. So how do we start defining this thing called hand depth? What is it? What are we talking about? Well, it's pretty self-evident that we're talking about the hands when we talk about hand depth. So we almost kind of want to forget about the golf club altogether and really think more about what our hands are doing when it comes to the hand depth topic. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of take a look here and start labeling a few things. So when I set up to this golf ball, we can see that I've got an orange line which is representing my target line, or the line that I hope the ball flies on or starts on. And then I've got this white line as well. And that white line you can kind of see in the video is underneath my hands. And when we're talking about depth, we want to talk about getting the hands to move behind this white line. We don't want the hands to simply go up the white line, creating a very vertical and upward backswing. Rather, we want to try to get the hands to move away without taking the club head and moving it behind the body, right? We see a lot of people that get the golf club laid off significantly when they try to move this club head around their body and it gets really laid off looking at the top, right? So how do we understand the relationship between how the club head is moving and how the hands are moving? And that would be how this shaft is moving through time and space. And that's where this gets really, really interesting, because we want to talk about how we use the dynamic lie in the golf swing, right? Because that's what we want to manage to make sure we're hitting the middle of the face. So if we think about this, if we don't create proper hand depth, what tends to happen is we actually end up not having any real room to swing from the inside like a lot of people are trying to do. Okay, there's also some other symptoms that happen to where we start getting into excessive radial deviation, and we also get into excessive ulnar deviation for some people who really try to fight that. So we want to try to manage the balance point of this golf club throughout the golf swing. So we know that there's a balance point roughly right about here in the golf club. And what I want to do is I want to feel like that golf club stays the same weight in motion. I don't ever want to feel like the golf club gets heavier or it gets lighter. So for most people, when they start their golf swing and they rely on the wrist to do that, the golf club tends to get much heavier feeling to them. So we want to avoid this, because when it gets heavier, we tend to start reacting with the body to manage more weight. So now that we understand how dynamic lie plays out a little bit throughout the golf swing, what we can start looking into now is how the length of the golf swing is really also affected by hand depth. Because when we think about how the hands move, they move in 3 dimensions. So you could think of an XYZ graph chart, right? It's very, very simple. If I move my hands up, it moves so many units away from the ball. But if I also get my hands to move more behind and create depth away from their starting position, then I also get to add those units as well. And now we can see that the overall length of my arc is going to be longer. And by creating a longer runway, now I can send a bigger plane down the runway and still get it to take off and create more speed and more energy. So it's really, really important that we're using the hand depth to create a long runway, because most people tend to think that they don't have the flexibility to do this, but what we're going to find out later in this video is they're actually just not really moving in the correct sequence, but we're really leaving a lot of yards on the table by not creating proper hand depth during the golf swing. But for the super big gearheads out there that love talking forces and pressures, I got some really big news for you. Hand depth is really, really important in terms of using the ground well as well. And here's the reason why. When we do a good job of creating hand depth in the golf swing, what that allows us to do is it actually allows for us to twist and rotate and create what they normally call a pivot in the golf swing. So by creating a pivot, what that allows for me to do is it allows for me to extend my spine. And as I'm allowed to extend my spine in the backswing, what we're going to see is that I'm also able to get my pressure in my trail foot to move posteriorly towards my heel. So that's going to give me the ability to load correctly and create a pivot around my spine, and also allow for that extension within the spine, which is obviously going to allow me to create as much power as possible when it comes to the loading phase of the golf swing. So why is it that a lot of golfers come up short when it comes to creating proper hand depth? Well, a lot of reasons is because we tend to look at our golf swings through video, and we can do some things in the video that makes it appear like we're doing the things we want to do in terms of making hand depth, but in reality we're really kind of cheating it. So how is it that a lot of golfers cheat this when they're doing this? We're going to take a look at a couple of the most common ways we see people get into a position to where they struggle to create proper hand depth. So how do people cheat hand depth on video? It's a great question, and we see it all the time. And one of the most common ways we see this is people start relying on the wrist to do the job of the body. And what I mean by this is we get into an excessive or too early extension flexion of the wrist. So when we set this up to the ball and we're looking from down the line, what we want to see here is that this person's going to get into early extension flexion in the wrist, and then they're going to move the club into what they think is good position. And when we look at this on camera, it looks like I'm in a pretty good position to hit this ball, but in reality, I haven't turned my body at all. So it has a good look, but I really haven't created any hand depth. And for the most part, my hands have more or less just moved vertically, and I haven't really moved them away from the target line or the hand line at all. Another way that we see this happen a lot is a lot of golfers will actually get their trail arm retracting into their rib cage very early in the backswing. And this tends to cause a lot of problems down the pipe as well, because what we see is that in video, this looks pretty good, and we're like, yeah, if we could hit it from that position, it'd be really good. But when we get out onto the golf course, what we find out is with this position, I don't have any leverage or runway to accelerate this golf club and really hit the ball. So where a lot of people run into a trouble getting steep and across the line at the top is that they run into retraction, and then when that happens, they feel like they don't have enough backswing, and then they try to lift. And that's what tends to get that golf club moving across the line at the top. But in video, they'll constantly rehearse getting to this position here, which once again down the line looks great. But in reality, we can see that the hands are still pretty much still vertical with where they started, and we didn't create much hand depth. All right, so now the most common that we see is a lot of us have been described as maybe having a flat backswing. And I don't know about you, but man, I used to really, that would break my heart when I would hear that as a youngster and I was told that I had a flat backswing. But for people that have struggled with this in the past, they will do everything in their power to not have a flat backswing. So moving to the down the line camera, what these people will do that tend to get the club moving kind of low and around their body this way is they'll go for the lift technique. And when we talk about lifting the club up, what we tend to see is that players get too much flexion going on in the arms, and we tend to also partner that with a little too much radial deviation in the wrist. So what ends up happening is we end up kind of throwing this club, and it gets really long and John Daly looking, and even we kind of lose our left hand grip maybe a little bit, and then we go to snap this thing back around. That's what tends to lead to that over the top move that most players hate seeing in their golf swing. So how do they get to that position once again? They tend to, instead of creating a nice rotation with the body, once again the body stays inactive when we go into lift mode, and that's what gets us causing too much flexion and radial deviation in the wrist, which really once again gets my hands not moving behind the line that they started on, rather staying more vertical with that, and now I don't have the proper hand depth to create optimal launch conditions and my most speed. Let's talk about how we're making sure that we're creating the most hand depth we can for you. So when we look at this concept, what really tends to get in the way and what causes people to cheat this in the camera the most is their concept for what good posture looks like. Because typically posture tends to lead to what we're able to do due to needing to be able to extend the spine throughout the golf swing. So for a lot of people, we've taken golf lessons in the past where we've gotten on the video and they draw a line and it's right down our back like that, and they tell us that we want to keep this as straight as possible throughout the entire golf swing. But like we can see with our buddy Paul, obviously there's a curve in the lower spinal column. And that curve is there for very good reason, because it allows for us to stand up. So when we do get into the posture of trying to keep our back nice and straight, we can see that we're really putting a lot of load into the facet joints and the low back, and we're creating a condition to where the facet joints are at their maximum range of motion. So what ends up happening is that when I get into this position and my facet joints can't flex anymore, my spine can't go backwards or away. So now I'm not going to be able to create any sufficient hand depth. So how do we get around this? Well, I think the easiest way is when we think of our posture, we want to make sure that we're keeping everything from our shoulders to our pelvis nice and stacked on top of one another as vertically as we can get it. So I know there's a lot of bad negative press out there about too much knee bend in the golf swing, and I'm not saying that that doesn't happen, but for us to create good posture that's stacked up, we're going to need to employ a little bit of knee bend to do this. So what we want to do is we want to make sure we're doing a great job of getting our chest stacked up on top of our abdomen and rib cage, and then getting that stacked on top of our pelvis, so that when we get into our posture, we're able to create nice extension throughout the body and getting the pressure more into the balls of the feet and in an active and ready position. That's going to be our best bet for helping us fix some of these hand depth issues, because when we start from this position here, it's going to be really hard to get the hands to want to move this way when I'm stuck in this position and can't rotate my chest because of the end range of motion I've created within the facet joints in my low back. So now that we've got our posture taken care of and we're in a great starting static position, let's talk about the dynamics or the motion of this movement. And we want to use a very simple analogy here. And we want to think of our body in a series of gears, kind of like a nice watch. So if you take the crystal off the watch and you remove the faceplate, you're going to find a bunch of really small gears. And then as you take those away, as you move down and deeper into the watch, you're going to find your biggest gears. So we want to think of the human body as being a series of gears as well. And we obviously understand that to create hand depth, we need to rotate the hands around the body and not pull the hands in towards the body. So when it comes to doing this, how do we make these gears move in the correct order? So if we think about everything kind of moving along together, the first stop we're going to come to is going to be the lower body stop. And if we want to think of round numbers, we're just trying to get the lower body to move roughly 45 degrees. That's what we're trying to do with the lower body. So the first thing that's going to stop, the first gear that's going to click into place is going to be the lower body, followed by the upper body. And that's going to turn, let's say, past 45, another 45, and try to get to 90 degrees. So now we can see that we've got this second gear to turn in place. And what that allows for us to do is that allows for us to go ahead and keep our arms nice and extended and manage the dynamic lie of this golf club during the take back. More importantly, it's also allowed, as we can see from the down the line camera, that I'm also able to create some depth away from my starting line with my hands, and my golf club is still in line with me and not laid off in a position where I'm going to have to try to steepen the shaft and the downswing. So we can really see how trying to get the body to turn in the correct sequence and then use the chest or the sternum to manage where the club head is in time is really going to be useful in helping us create a much better pivot and also create the proper amount of hand depth in the golf swing. Now for my favorite. What can I share with you that's going to help you take this and apply it to your golf game? And very simply, we're just going to use a golf club. So the thing I love about this drill is it doesn't require a lot of setup, and it also doesn't require anything than something you probably already have if you're watching this video. So what we're going to do with our trusty golf club here is we're going to take the bottom of it, or the head, and we're going to put it right here in our sternum, and we're going to put it upside down just like that. Or I'm sorry, just face up like that. Okay, so now that this is in my sternum, I'm going to go ahead and stretch my arms out and get them fully extended, as well as getting my body extended. So from the down the line position, you can see here, I'm in more or less my normal golf posture. Obviously the club would be a little bit lower, but it's a little long here. So that's why we see it in this position. And what we want to do is we want to keep this golf club planted against our sternum, and we want to go ahead and move the golf club back as far as we can. And what we're going to feel there is a big stretch in the lats when we do this, and we can see that we're really having to rotate the body to do this. I'm not able to retract my arm into my side as much. I'm not able to extend and flex my wrist as much, and it really forces me to kind of learn how I've got to move my body to do this. So I'm really having to learn how to twist my body and keep my arms extended instead of letting my arms do the job of my body. Thanks so much for watching this video, and we hope that it adds some clarity to the topic of hand depth for you. Make sure that you're paying special attention when you're looking at this on video, because as we spoke about earlier, there's lots of ways to cheat this. And until next time, keep grinding.